everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blooming Daily. I am, as always, so excited to be back in the studio, and I'm your host, Ruth. This feels just so refreshing. Every time I just think of how much I learn from our amazing guests and how much I learn from even the things I say and how much I learn from the comments we get back whenever people tune into the episode. So I'm just really excited to be back in the studio and to be in with an amazing guest. With me in the studio today is one of my first year roommates, and it feels like bittersweet to say this because we're both now about to graduate, and it's like, what? Oh my god. Which is another reason I'm so excited to have her on the show, because she is like so smart and so hardworking and so diligent. And I'm like, oh my god. So yes, join me in welcoming Sammi.
Thank you. So glad to be on the show.
Welcome, Sammi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's a little bit chilly out, but the sunshine's very beautiful.
I definitely agree. I was like freezing when I left my dorm, but I was like, it's so bright and so beautiful, and because it's so cold, there isn't slush everywhere. It's all just really pretty snow. So I really, really like that. How's your week?
It's been good. Yeah, I feel like academics are starting to ramp up, and so that's been really interesting to juggle. And I'm doing a lot more running now, which has been nice. But there is a lot of black ice out there, so I've been on a few runs now where I've almost wiped out.
Yeah, but the black ice, it would get you.
Especially when you're least expecting it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. One night I was going to the library I was going to one of the buildings to finish my physics assignment. And there was this girl just on the floor, and I saw her from afar. I just knew she had slipped on black ice. I was like, oh. And then she had her gym shoes in her hand, on the floor. And I was like, oh my gosh. She was like, yeah, she was going to the gym, and she didn't see the black ice. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Do you need help? She was like, yes, please. And I was like, oh my God. So, yeah, the black ice, no. But, yeah, we are in February, so it's really cold now, but it's going to start getting warmer soon. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that too. How well can you run outside in this weather?
So at certain temperatures, it's really not safe to be outside. So like if it's, I don't know, below like single digits kind of deal, I'm hesitant to go outside, not only because I'm worried about like the temperature, but also I feel like you're more prone to injuries when you have that kind of temperature. Your muscles freeze up a little bit more. But luckily we haven't been like freezing cold, so I've tried to get out with like a lot of layers, and then like worst case scenario, I just run on the treadmill and buck. So yeah.
Yes. Wow. I sometimes see people running outside, and I'm just like, wow, how are you running in minus, 7 degrees Celsius weather? That's a lot. But yeah, I think I'm just always very inspired by the kind of work athletes put into their craft. And I think, yeah, that's just a really beautiful thing. So speaking about running, Sammi has given us a good segue. Today we're going to be speaking about respiratory health, because this is so vital to our lives. It's so important for how we show up to the world and how we can move through the world. And I thought that it would be really important for us to have this conversation and to have it with Sammi, since she has extensive experience with running. And so I'm just going to start off by asking about your personal experiences with running and how you got into that, like how old you were and how that has been over the years.
Yeah, so I didn't start running like at a young age. I honestly was like really not athletically inclined. My parents really didn't think I would do well with athletics because my hand-eye coordination was always like the most terrible thing in the world.
Oh no.
So I actually started running because one of my friends, freshman year of high school, was like, "Oh, I'm going to be on the cross-country team. Like, you should join." And I was like, "Okay." I mean, like, I don't know. Like, the longest I've run is like 3 miles and like at a 10-minute pace, and like that's pushing it. So I still remember my first practice, and we had to run 3 miles. So that was like the longest I had ever run, and we were doing that for the first practice.
Wow.
And it had hills, and all I had ever done was like sometimes I would run on our treadmill at home, which is like very flat. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like how am I going to get through this?
Goodness.
And I just remember like my teammates being so supportive, and then being like, "You've got this, Sammy," and like them running back to make sure that I was doing okay, and they're like, "Hey, like let's take a little bit of a walk break here, and then we'll like get back to running." So I think that really started to pull me into the running community, just the amount of supportiveness and the fact that like I also really enjoyed how you could see how you improved over the time in like time-based ways.
Yes.
So it was very measurable at some moments. Yeah, so I did start running in high school, and I really found a love for it because it also allowed me to be outside a lot more.
That's so
in,
true.
Like, many different kind of weathers, and it really gave me a sense of like grounding as well as community.
That's so interesting because I feel like a lot of people usually start their athletics at younger ages, or it feels like a lot of people who do it in college or do it competitively have been running or doing other things like basketball and hockey or just related sports much earlier. So it feels exciting to know that for you, it wasn't that you started running at 6 or or that. And how did your parents feel when you got into running?
Well, my mom has always been like a very big advocate of like moving your body in ways that make you feel good. And when she was young, she did a lot of different sports. So she was very happy for me to have sort of an outlet for like my stress, but also like a great way to get to know people and make sure that I was like moving my body in ways that made me feel good. And my dad, he like was like, "Oh, this is exciting." It very much deviated from what I was doing like beforehand, because I play the violin, so I was doing a lot of like orchestra. And then like when I was really young, I would do some dance. So it was a whole new like area for my family. And they were very supportive of it, and they really liked coming to the meets to cheer for me. And then afterwards, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're so sweaty," or they're like, "Oh my goodness, like so many people look like they're dying." It's just like a really rough sport sometimes.
Oh my goodness. This is making me think of childhood because I used to love to run, but especially since I've gotten to bowling, I've reflected on this particular point a lot, that just because running at home isn't, I mean, people do run, especially now. I feel like younger generations are getting more into running, but just running on the streets back at home, especially where I grew up, it wasn't just a common thing. You just did not really see people just jogging on the road or running, especially the environment I grew up in. So for me, knowing that I would have probably gotten into track, I mean, I did run in school, but I feel as though if I was in a space that was more encouraging of running outdoors or being very outdoorsy, I might have run more. I remember I would just be going to meet my mom, maybe where she was, and run from home, and it'd be like people would just be like, "Why are you just running across the road?" You know, it wasn't just a natural thing to really do. But yeah, so I've been trying to get more into running. I tried to run last semester once a week.
Okay.
Then fall came and decided to become too cold, and then I stopped running. But I do want to get more into running, and I'm hoping. Oh, I told a friend I don't remember who I told this last semester, that I wanted to run a 5K.
Oh my gosh.
I have not done that yet because it's now cold. But maybe post grad, I want to start off by running a 5K and then maybe half marathon and then maybe
full
sometime in
marathon?
the future, I'll do a full marathon. But I'm not really sure where to start. But maybe when it gets warmer, I would start running again.
Yeah, I mean, it's never too late to like start running, and I think you alluded to it very nicely. Like, it's sort of a product of your environment. A lot of places are not conducive to running, whether it be because of safety or because there's not infrastructure for it. I think a lot of people have this misconception that running is the sport that everyone can do, that everyone can afford. But if you look at the price of like good running shoes so that you don't hurt your feet, and you think about nutrition, and you think about having access to spaces where you can go running and feel safe, especially as like a woman, it starts narrowing down a lot of things. And I feel very privileged to have come from a place where like I do feel safe and I have space to run and I can afford all of those amenities. But yeah, I often think about it sometimes, especially if you're like traveling and you go to somewhere where you don't know where it is, like the amount of anxiety about like, oh, do you think it'd be safe to run is very much on the forefront of my mind.
Yes, that's so true. And I really love and appreciate this nuance you just added by saying not everyone has equal access to running, because on the surface that's what it seems like. You're just running. It seems like you don't need equipment in quotes, or you don't need a specialized facility, but depending on where you live you might have different access. But yeah, so I think that there are just many factors that are involved. And just like we would speak about for respiratory health in general, we'll still get into this. There are also many factors that influence people's respiratory health that we might not think about. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask about how you think running has impacted your respiratory health over the years. I don't know if you can really remember how you felt when you started running, but how do you think running has built your lung endurance or your capacity and all of that over the years now, and now that you're someone who has run many, 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 many miles over many, many years?
Well, I think a lot of runners, their ultimate goal is to be able to run as efficiently as possible, and that includes like oxygen and like being able to handle like lactic acid buildup and fatigue. And to be honest, when I started running, I didn't have any of that. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm dying. Yeah, I'm still moving forward. Like, how is this possible? But I definitely feel like my endurance has gotten a lot better. I think my breathing is a lot more controlled. I feel like I have a lot more control over how I move oxygen in and around my body.
That sounds so cool.
It sounds so cool, but like also it does come with just like a lot of practice and just like putting your body through that kind of like sort of chronic low maintenance stress. Your body does adapt to sort of compensate for this kind of external pressure you're putting on it, where like you do get a lot more efficient with like your oxygen and breathing, and that's like a big thing for runners, like making sure they have like relaxed breathing techniques, as well as like also red blood cells like are getting better at like carrying the oxygen. And so yeah, I definitely think physically it's helped me with my respiratory health long term.
Yes, I think that you said really important things, because I guess this is a place to put in one of the things I wanted to say about respiratory health. That overall running helps with like physical, not running. I mean, good respiratory health helps with just enhanced physical performance in general. When you have strong lung function, you're able to, it improves your stamina and your endurance, and it just helps you stay more active. And I think you've alluded to that, or even really fully said that, because your body is more efficient in moving around oxygen and just your red blood cells and all of that. So I think that's really interesting. And I was also curious to know if you could tell that your endurance was changing, or are you able to tell now that many years have passed, or were you able to tell even then 2 months into running or 6 months into running? Could you tell then, or did it take you many years to be able to see that?
Yeah, that's like a really great question. I feel like in the beginning, coming from no running to just like starting to run, I definitely felt the impact in a few weeks. Like the runs got easier. I was recovering faster. I could run farther. Like one of the biggest milestones that I had at the end of my first cross country season that I was able to run 5 miles. I was like, wow. Like that kind of progress built up, and it becomes evident very quickly. But I think long term also I've noticed how my running has sort of helped my respiratory health. I'll take like a week or two off of running just to like, pull back from it and like make sure my body's recovering. And then the first week back is always the hardest. You're like, wow, I feel like I've never moved before in my entire life. But then like the second week, it's like perfectly fine again. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the consistency of running and the fact that it has been impacting my body and changing my body for the better.
That's really great to hear, because again, you're someone who has run for a good amount of time, and you're someone who started at the age where you were, a teenager. So I think that's really good to know. Speaking of another benefit of respiratory health, I saw that it supports your overall body's health and vitality. And I was curious to hear about the other ways running and having better respiratory health has helped your health in general, if you know this.
Yeah, so personally, I feel like I just feel better after I've run. A lot of it has to do with like the endorphins being released afterwards. But also I feel like I've been re-energized because I've just moved my body, but I've also taken in a lot of oxygen and I've really cycled through that. I wish I could say it helps me with stair climbing. I don't know how it doesn't correlate, but
that's so interesting.
Yeah, every time I go upstairs, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to pass out. Like, why do I run? But, yeah, it definitely helps me in other ways. Like, when I want to go on a long walk, it's not too tiring. Or if I need to, like, do some more, like, explosive movements of, like, carrying my stuff to move myself into my, like, apartment for the year.
Yes.
Like, I'm not as fatigued as I think I would be if I wasn't, like, constantly moving my body in that sort of way.
Yes, that makes total sense. And speaking about, you said something now about climbing the stairs and feel like, oh my God, I'm still out of breath. I face that a lot too. And I'm like, even on the days I go on a run, or the times I went on a run last semester, and then I go back and I still was panting on the stairs. I'm like, wait, why is this? So I totally get that. And going from that, I was wondering if there are times you've noticed yourself really struggling to breathe well during exercises, or if there have been not even just like one isolated period of time, but periods of time where you've struggled with respiratory health during training, and if/how that impacted your performance, or what you just noticed from that whole experience.
Yeah. So when I was little, I, like, got pneumonia multiple times. So I think, like, in the beginning, I wasn't even set out for really strong respiratory health. But definitely when I feel sick, it really kicks in where I'm like, wow, like, I'm struggling a lot. Or, like, if I'm doing a really hard workout, I can feel it. I can feel my body being like, okay, we're reaching the limits of where we've built towards. Like, you're going to try to push past it, and it's going to hurt. And I think that often leaves me, like, sort of doubled over and, like, breathing really, really heavily. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think in many ways your body is stronger than you think it is. And so I'm not advocating for, like, pushing yourself to, like, pass.
Yes.
But, like, towing the line of what is, your top physical health and just ever so slightly, like, pushing it, nudging it down the road through, like, like, pushing your body to the capacity of its respiratory, like, capabilities, I think is something that benefits you over time. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree. And like you said earlier in the podcast, that the body keeps adjusting. When you push it a little more, it adjusts and you become better and better. And of course, it's really important to not start off and then push yourself so much the first go, because then your body might break down. But those incremental progresses and just even minute increases can do a lot for your body, and I think that's really interesting. And I was also wondering, you said something about now about growing up and not being set with great respiratory health. I wanted to know a little more about that. Were there any particular like respiratory issues growing up, or did they come up when you started running, because now you're running and you're really pushing your respiratory system?
Yeah, so luckily I didn't develop anything like asthma or anything like that. But I just think as a child, just like I grew up in an orphanage for a year, so I'm not entirely sure what happened over there. But I definitely don't think I was like maybe the healthiest at all times. And I think because my parents really intervened in the early stages of maybe what was a bit of poor respiratory health, it really helped me avoid something that might be more detrimental as I grew older. But yeah, I know a lot of teammates that have inhalers or are using inhalers.
Teammates?
Yeah.
People, wait, you can. Whoa!
Yeah.
I'm so wait. How does that work? How do you run long distance and then use an inhaler? Isn't that dangerous? Or
well, a lot of them use it like pre-race, pre-workout.
wow.
And it is regulated by the NCAA. And you have to have like doctor's permission in order to use it. But yeah, they just like it helps sort of open up their lungs so that they're able to like push themselves to that capacity. Whereas, like, if they weren't using an inhaler, they would be already having, like, this sort of handicap.
Yes.
Before they even started.
Wow. You saying this just reminds me of a movie. I can't remember what it's called, but a movie about this. I think it was probably a fictional movie. About this young girl who got into running, but who was asthmatic, and how. So, you saying that, I was first like, wait, what? And then I remembered I actually saw a movie like that. And I think it's just really interesting. And now I'm curious to look up or study, maybe after this podcast, whether for asthmatic patients, they are sometimes administered maybe like running therapy. I don't know if that's a thing.
I feel like that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, people were using, like, quote-unquote running therapy. I know that, like, sometimes Parkinson's patients are, like, prescribed movement of some sort where it's, like, aerobic or anaerobic, and they've been doing studies on whether it helps with their motor capabilities. So I wouldn't be surprised if they sort of try to do exposure therapy for patients with asthma.
Yes. No, I'm really curious. Wow. And, again, we've spoken about 2 reasons that a good respiratory health helps. And again, if you've probably noticed by now, I'm infusing this into the conversation instead of just leaving it for the end, because I think it's very relevant to leave it in. Another importance of good respiratory health, or taking care of our respiratory health in general, is our immune system.
Yes.
Because we're breathing in a lot of things. We're breathing in things that help build our immune system, but we're also breathing in things that might make us sick, and we're breathing in things that might really harm our body. So I know improving our immunity and our disease resistance is definitely something that a good respiratory health does. And I was wondering if you've noticed that, or if there's been a time you ran in maybe a foggy area or a place filled with smoke, and if you had to go to the doctor for it, or if any of that happened.
I've never had to go to the doctor for running in air polluted areas, but I can definitely tell the difference, especially if it's like very humid, or if you're running through sort of a smoggy area. Your lungs do recognize that something is happening, and I feel like it pushes you into sort of trying to compensate for that, and so your heart rate might go up, and your run might feel a little bit harder than what it typically feels like, and bringing it back to sort of the environment and how that impacts how you're running, and whether you can or cannot run. I think a lot of what is sometimes overlooked is the fact that air pollution is all around us.
Yes.
And it's become increasingly more and more toxic sometimes, especially in urban areas. And so a lot of studies have started looking into how that affects runners. Because we usually think of running as sort of a great way to move your body, a great way to keep yourself healthy and in shape. But they've seen that in areas particularly with high air pollution rates, it could actually be harmful sometimes to be out in those conditions running, because you are breathing in so much more air, so much more particulates, and that in turn is affecting your overall well-being.
Yes, that's so interesting because, again, taking it back to what you said, environment really matters. And I know, but before we started recording this episode, Sammy spoke about pesticides and all of that, and I wanted to know if you wanted to speak more of that about the class you're taking and the things you've read about air pollution and pesticides and that how that impacts.
Yeah. So a lot of pesticides come in a lot of different forms, and they can be, sometimes you might have seen pictures of like big mass production farms spraying pesticides. So those become like airborne because they're aerosols. And right now in my ecotoxicology class, we're talking about the implications of that on wildlife health, environmental health, and sometimes also human health. And I read this really great book. So we read Silent Spring that touched upon a lot of like DDT, which has now been outlawed in the United States. But in Living Downstream, which is a book that is sort of modeled off of Silent Spring, where they're attacking this pesticide atrazine, the author Steingraber talked about air pollution and how pesticides and chemicals can become airborne, and they don't necessarily break down that quickly, and they travel on like the wind currents. And so one thing that stuck with me is the fact that like when you're in an environment where you sort of label it as like pristine, it's not really pristine. Like you are interacting with a lot of different chemicals or molecules that you didn't really think you were interacting with because they didn't originate there. And so I think that also looking at respiratory health globally is really important, and just seeing how like rates and stuff like that are connected with use of pesticides, use of chemicals, air pollution, but also just like how does it cycle around.
That is definitely something that is connected to global health because, like you said, if it's cycling around, it's reaching many people that might not even have contributed to, that might not be a part of the source of these pesticides. So, let's say in a neighboring town, they are doing a lot of industrial farming, but then the wind currents are blowing the pesticides to another town, and then they're being impacted by it. So I definitely think it's really interesting to think of that and the global health perspective and all the people that might be affected by these air pollution or these pesticides, and even just thinking about how interconnected these things are. Whereas it might be farming, but this residual part of the farming is negatively impacting people, which is really sad. But yeah, that's just one of the many things we have to think about when we're implementing strategies for farming or when we're trying to get things out in mass and we're trying to be efficient and all of that. There are so many ways that it might be impacting people. But yes. So yes, we're speaking about how healthy lungs and how respiratory health in general can help with your immune system, and it can help healthier lungs. I'm sure can help filter out pollutants more because the way our lungs are built, they can help filter out pollutants more. But when we don't have healthy lungs, then your body can't filter out the pollutants as effectively.
Yeah.
and there are respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and bronchitis and just so many things like that. So I definitely agree with the immunity part. Another importance of, respiratory health is just quality of life. And I wanted to speak to you. I wanted to hear your thoughts about that. How good respiratory health really helps to just almost maintain your independence and your mobility and the way you go around the world. And you can walk, let's say, longer, you can run longer, there's just so many things you can probably do longer when you have a good respiratory health that you might not be able to do otherwise when you don't have as good a respiratory health. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, if you have any reflections on, oh yes, I see it in the way when I'm doing this or I'm doing that, I can just tell that because I've run so much and because my respiratory health is in XYZ states, I can perform XYZ better. So I wanted to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think good respiratory health and good health in general is something that a lot of people take for granted, especially because it's sort of expected that you are in good respiratory health in general if you're a healthy individual. And so I personally really appreciate being able to do things longer or do activities that are a little bit more physically demanding because of the quality of my respiratory health, the strength of it. I find often, like, if I'm on vacations and I'm walking around a lot or I want to do a more physical activity, I feel lucky that I can partake in it and not feel completely fatigued by, like, going on a lovely, like, mountain hike or, walking for, like, 1 to 2 hours to, like, see the sights and go somewhere. So I think it just gives you a lot of freedom to be able to live the life that you'd like, and not have to worry about how your breathing or your stamina will affect it.
Yes, I agree. And like we said, there are many things that we might not even realize until we have issues with them. Like now we might all be, many people listening to this might be in the mid stages of life, in the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and it's like, oh, your lungs are doing well, but as you age, your body can't do the same thing it could have done earlier. And then you might notice, oh, breathing is harder and all of this, but really knowing that there are things we can do now to strengthen our respiratory health is something that is important to note. And then the last thing I wanted to ask before we go into practical tips on building stronger health and respiratory health, which this last question would lead us into there, is if there are particular ways that your coaches or your trainers encourage you to see your respiratory health. Are there particular exercises you're given, or are there workouts that you notice are targeted towards your respiratory health?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's any particular exercises that we're given to improve our respiratory health. We're often told if we're really sick, we shouldn't run, but I think that's just a general rule of thumb. Yeah. If your body's already run down, you shouldn't do that. As well, thinking about like workouts that target respiratory health, I would say a lot of threshold workouts target respiratory health. So that's where you basically are not doing like a comfortable pace, but you're not running at race pace. It's usually like a minute and a half slower than your race pace. And so you're pushing your body, but you're also allowing it to recover. So you can do usually multiple mile reps at a single pace. And you can feel the fatigue building up, but it's not overwhelming. And I think that really helps increase your respiratory capacity because you are towing the line, but you're not pushing it. And so it's allowing it to expand without breaking.
Something you said now was so interesting, towing the line but not pushing it. And for those who might not know what their running pace is, can you... I'm wondering how we can explain this in a way where it's like for someone who doesn't even run in general? How would you explain that? Like for someone who doesn't even know their racing pace?
Yeah, I would say it's sort of a feeling. And it's like you shouldn't be at a conversational pace. You shouldn't be able to talk, but you shouldn't be breathing so heavily that you have to stop. And when you finish a rep, you shouldn't necessarily be doubled over, unable to do another one. You should feel tired, but after like a minute break, you should be able to go back and do that again. So I guess it would be similar to like maybe if you were like into weightlifting, or you know how that feels, where you can feel like you feel the burn, but you can still do it again. And it's not like you're going to pass out.
Yes.
So it's like the in-between, which is sometimes hard to learn, especially if, you know, you haven't raced, you haven't really been running, but it's definitely not an all-out sprint. That is not threshold.
That's really good to know, and I like the way you explained it, because even people who haven't run before or are just getting into running can kind of say, okay, how does this feel like for me? And something I want to mention now before we transition into the last part of this episode is that understanding how your body feels and where your body's at is really important, which is why we can give clear cuts, do this, do this, do this. And we're going to make some suggestions now, but we're all coming from different places with different experiences with running and different so many things, different body build up. And so really knowing how your body responds, or really monitoring how your body responds, is really important so that you're not pushing yourself to a dangerous zone.
Yeah, I think like something that a lot of people should focus on is giving themselves grace, especially if you're new to running or you're getting back into it. I think also comparison can be dangerous if you think that you should be running at a certain pace, but you really haven't worked up to it yet. Just like letting yourself sort of feel how your body feels, and knowing that it's okay that you're not running like, I don't know, 8-minute miles or whatever your ultimate goal is at the beginning, because you shouldn't be. You're working up towards it.
Yes.
And you should do it in a healthy way so that you don't get injured and you don't burn out too quickly. Yeah.
Yes. And I just remember I was going to ask this. Apart from running, do you know any other sports or exercises that are, in quotes, easy to get into, or that have that are more accessible in a way for people that help build respiratory health?
Yeah, so a lot of aerobic exercises. From biking, you go to a spin class, or you could just bike around, to even walking. A lot of studies have shown that respiratory health, the differences between running and walking are sometimes not very different at all. And sometimes if you don't have the capacity to necessarily run every day, if you can get outside and get your body moving and go for a nice long walk, that might be enjoyable to you, maybe listen to some music or something like that that makes you happy, I think that's a great way to work on your respiratory health.
And I'm really glad you said the running part, because the walking part, because that's so important to remember, that you can also walk. You really can also walk. And you said that in a really great way, because sometimes people might feel like, I don't want to run, but you can also walk, and that can help with your respiratory health. So this leads us to the last part of our episode, where we're just going to, for a few minutes, speak about some of the ways you can improve your respiratory health. And one of the things we wanted to speak about was cardiovascular exercises, but Sammi has spoken about that, and so we might not need to speak on that too long. But aerobic exercises like running, swimming, cycling, brisk walking. It might not be the regular walking pace, like you're strolling, you're walking briskly, but you're also not running. So that helps. Other things like interval training, sprinting and walking. Do you sometimes do that where you sprint a bit and you walk and you sprint and you
Yeah,
walk?
sometimes when I'm not feeling like running, I'll do like a little sprint walk kind of combo, and I feel like that helps break it up, and it really gets me to go outside and move my body instead of just like sitting at home. Yeah.
And another thing that we have is also high altitude training, walking up high altitudes. And I wonder if you ever do that, like going on a walk on a hilly place or going on a run on a hilly place.
Yeah, I like to incorporate hills into my run. I just think it helps with overall strength, and it also improves your aerobic capacity. But yeah, when I had the privilege of being in Colorado at some point, not for running, but just for family vacation, and I could feel the air was different up there. And so instead of trying to run, I definitely just walked because I didn't want to push my body too much. But that also was really nice to have that experience.
I agree. And another thing I wanted us to highlight was the importance of staying hydrated. The thing is, the mucus in our lungs help to trap bacteria and particles. We said they were inhaling so much from the air, many of which we can't see with our natural eyes. And the mucus helps to trap them and to help release them. But when you're dehydrated, that mucus can get really thickened and it can make it harder for your airways to be cleared. And so drinking water and staying hydrated is really important. And I was wondering how that has been for you, Sammy. Like when you're training, how much water do you have to drink? And in general, how and why do you think staying hydrated is really important for respiratory health?
Yeah, so I can definitely tell when I need to up my water intake. If a run feels hard, or I feel a little bit weak or dizzy, I'm usually like, oh, I didn't drink enough today. And I think that is very apparent in the summer, especially when you're sweating a lot and you're exerting yourself a little bit more because of the heat. It's so important to hydrate under those conditions. And even in the winter, I think people often forget. They're like, oh, I'm not sweating as much. I'm not maybe moving as much. But you're in environments where the air is really drying. You have heat, which is like not necessarily adding moisture into the air. And so I feel like it's also very easy to get dehydrated in the winter time as well. So I think the easy rule of thumb is always try to drink water throughout the day.
Yes, staying hydrated definitely will help with your respiratory health. And then, so staying hydrated is a big one, and I wanted to add that to the cardiovascular exercises. And then a third thing I wanted to speak about was eating foods that support lung health. Some of those are antioxidant rich foods like leafy greens, nuts, berries. Vitamin D really supports, immune function and lung health. So, and this is found in eggs, mushrooms, and then omega-3 fatty acids found in fish. Those help with reducing airway inflammation. So we cannot overemphasize the importance of good diet in your respiratory health. And again, going back to you, Sammy, I am curious to know if part of your training program or if your coaches encourage you to eat certain foods, or maybe not, but even if from your own personal research you've seen certain or you've heard of certain foods that really help with building up your respiratory health or just helping with your endurance as you run and helping you stay healthier and fit to be able to run.
Yeah, so we actually do utilize the nutritionist here on campus, and she comes in and gives us a talk every year about how important nutrition is in order to become the athlete you really want to be. And I think a lot of the takeaway is that it's really important to eat whole foods and to get the fruits and vegetables every day and really try to diversify your diet. But also one thing that she really emphasizes is that eating carbs is really important for endurance athletes. You're expending so much energy, and so your glycogen and like sort of all that kind of energy storage is getting depleted, and so you need to replenish it. And often I feel like society sort of villainizes carbs and are like, oh, it makes you fat or blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, like, no, it's like a main source of energy. And if you are eating complex carbs, if you are like fueling your body in that way, you're not only going to feel better, but you're going to see improvements in your performance and you're going to see improvements in your endurance.
Oh my goodness, Sammy. I'm so glad you spoke about the society villainizing carbs part, because it's like, carbs? What? Bread?
Yeah.
Oh my God. How can you be eating? And yes, we know that they are very processed, for example, loaves of bread and all of that. But carbs are important. You need that energy. We need it to survive. We need it to move around. And so, again, it's really important to find the right balance. But finding the right balance also means not completely eliminating it, because that's not balance.
Yeah, exactly. Balance is key. I think everything in moderation, like eating, fast food is okay if you eat it once in a while, like eating candy and stuff. I think it's, as you said, like unhealthy to eradicate something from your diet, because then you don't have that kind of balance.
Yes. And so the second to the last thing we want to speak about in terms of how to improve your respiratory health is good posture and just ways to enhance lung expansion. And this has been encouraged time and time again to avoid slouching and to watch the way you're sitting, because this can put pressure on your lungs if you're slouching or if your back is not arched well. So even when you're sitting, just really be mindful of, oh, the way I'm sitting really be hurting my lungs, or the way I'm like working on my laptop, or I'm on my phone, or am I twisting in this very odd way. And people encourage stretching to open up your chest. So I'm wondering, do you ever have to do stretch exercises before your workout starts? And do you have to do it when they end? Or how do you incorporate stretching and posture and all of that into your routines?
Yeah, so we do have a set of exercises that we like to do after certain types of runs. And it helps stretch our muscles and also make sure that we're like, not going from running to sitting. Because I think that is very detrimental to just like the overall health. You just worked out your muscles and then you're going to be stationary. So it's important to stretch after you do any physical activity and also before it, especially a hard workout. Doing dynamic stretches not only get your muscles ready and start connecting that mind muscle kind of connection, so that you can communicate them and like have a more efficient workout, but it also helps open up your airways and helps your blood get moving. So both beginning and after a workout is really important as well.
That is so true. And I mean, Sammy has said all that. There is to be said about the whole oxygen flowing and how it helps open up your lungs. And so really stretching is really important. And so the last thing I want to say is getting regular checkups and just monitoring your breathing in general. Really making sure that if you're having issues with breathing, or if you think, oh, I think there's something I'm struggling with, or wow, why is it that now I have to breathe more, or just, if you're just noticing anything off, it's really important to see a doctor and to get checkups with that. But again, we're all at different places. So sometimes if you just go for a run and you're breathing in an interesting way, it might not necessarily mean something is wrong. Your body is just adapting. Happens to me all the time when I run on the treadmill, or even the times I was running last semester and I'm panting.
Yes.
Like, oh my God. Oh my God. It's not like anything is wrong in general. My body is not just used to it. So yes, that's definitely something to consider. And so I just wanted to hear, before we wrap up the episode, what one main encouragement you have for people who are trying to really improve their respiratory health and might want to do it with running or biking or swimming, or what's one thing you think might be encouraging for someone who is starting off or trying to stay consistent to hear?
I would say patience and perseverance are very important. It's
Mm.
very often easy to hit a hard place and be like, oh, I'm gonna, take a step back from here and maybe when I come back to it, it'll be easier. But the truth of it is, especially with running, is that sometimes you have days where it's not the best, but that's okay because you're building towards something and not every day is going to be good. And being patient and not pushing too hard, too fast, too quickly is really a lot more sustainable and a lot more enjoyable.
Wise words. Wise words. With that, I think there is no better way to end this episode than what Sammy just said about patience and endurance and taking things at a good pace. With that, I want to say thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode. And thank you, Sammy, for coming on today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruth.
Of course, this was such a delight. And again, just like I said at the beginning, I always learn from these episodes myself, which is, for me, a beautiful thing about having these conversations, because we can't all know everything. It's just not possible. And this space is usually a place where I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly learning from people's experiences like I did from yours now. And I'm learning about the research that is being done. And I'm hearing about just the many nuances involved with this. So I really appreciate you sharing this, not just with me, but everyone who is going to tune into this episode. And I hope that people are feeling encouraged to push past what might feel like the norm in terms of, what they can do in terms of running or biking or all of that, and really think about respiratory health. This is one of the things we wanted to do with this episode, really make you think about, my respiratory health. Am I really taking care of it? Am I just leaving it to be, what it's going to be, or am I being intentional about it? So, yes. Again, thank you all so much. Please do not forget to drop your comments on any of the podcast platforms, or on any of our pages, or on our website, bloomingdaily.org. And if you have more questions about this or need more resources, we'll be happy to share them with you or point you in some direction that might be helpful for you. And please share with other people, friends, family, course mates, anyone you know would find this episode useful. Everyone, really, because everyone needs to think about their lung health. So, yes, and we know that if we can all be a little more intentional, this will really help with global health and just healthcare in general. Thank you again, Sammy, and I will see you all on the next episode. Bye.